Shalom, shalom, Yasha Allah. It's your brother Aklamak coming at you once again with another lesson. Giving all honor, praises, and glory unto the Father, the highest. Shalom, Wak Barak Lahabayat. To Mount Zion reborn, always a son of Israel. And before we begin this fire, let it be known, we serve the Most High, the Father. We honor the Son who will be King of the kingdom without end. We take on the commandments, and in this lesson, it's going to be a trial by fire pertaining to a doctrine that has taken root amongst our people. This is not going to be built on opinion or tradition, but bold, unflinching, and rooted in Torah. The law, the prophets, and the testimony of Yahawah, tried by fire, sealed by the Spirit. This ain't for clout, this ain't for crowd pleasing. It is for the remnant with ears to hear and who fears the Father and tremble at his word. So, in a time where the earth is covered in darkness and truth is hidden behind calendars created by our captors, the Father's voice still speaks. He does not change. He does not shift with the moons. He does not bow to Roman reckoning. Neither does his Sabbath. What was sanctified from the beginning will not be redefined by doctrine, tradition, or interpretation. This is not a debate. This is about truth, not tradition, not rabbinic lore. This is a return to thus saith the Lord. Any man trying to reinvent the Sabbath is wrestling against the hand of the Most High. Now understand this, I speak not to exalt myself. I'm not greater than any of my teachers, as I say often. But all doctrines, mine included, must be filtered through the law, the Psalms, and the prophets. And if the Lunar Sabbath doctrine cannot survive the Torah test, it cannot stand at all. So today we come with precepts, we come with fire, and we come to see if there's fragility in the doctrine of the Lunar Sabbath, and if so, may the words of the Most High demolish it in the spirit, not with man's logic, but with the unbreakable word of the living power. And before we get into anything else, understand this. The Sabbath has dominion and had dominion over man, over Adam, over Noah, over Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Before there was a single Levite, before there was a single feast day, or before a single lunar cycle was available to watch. The Most High said the Sabbath was made for man, not for moons, not for Israel only, not for any one nation, but for man. And that's why Exodus 20 doesn't say figure out the calendar. It says remember. Remember what? Not a new moon, not a priestly cycle, but a command that predates calendars, cultures, and covenants. The Sabbath is eternal, and every single attempt to tie it to moon cycles or floating weeks or days that count or days that don't count is a direct assault on the authority of the Most High and his voice. As Romans chapter 7 verse 1 says, the law hath dominion over man as long as he lives. But now men seemingly want to put time over the law. They want to give the moon dominion over what was commanded from the beginning. But the moon didn't create man. The moon didn't rest on the seventh day. The moon didn't hallow it. Yahawah did. So we're drawing the line today. Let every doctrine that lifts the moon over the law, we're bringing it down with the Spirit of the Most High and with the Word. This is the book of Romans chapter 3 verse 4, and it reads, "Let God be true and every man a liar, as it is written that thou mightest be justified in thy sayings and might overcome when thou art judged." So the foundation of the Sabbath was spoken into existence from the beginning. The Sabbath was not established by signs in the sky, lunar phases, or even angelic calculation. It was spoken into reality by the voice of the Most High. This is the book of Genesis chapter 2 verse 2 and 3, and it reads, "And on the seventh day God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because that in it he had rested from all his work which God created and made." So before there was a sun to rise or a moon to shine, the Sabbath existed. Some may say, how do you figure? Before man was formed from the dust, before any calendar, culture, or covenant, the Most High sanctified a day based on a cycle of labor and rest. This is the divine pattern: 6 days of labor, 1 day of rest. No moon mentioned, no dates listed, just structure from his mouth. This is the eternal setting of the Most High. So, by the time day 1 was in existence, the Sabbath was sanctified. The week was already laid out before there was ever a sun in the sky or moon. This is the book of Isaiah chapter 57 verse 15, and it reads, "For thus saith the high and lofty one that inhabiteth eternity, whose name is holy. I dwell in the high and holy place." So the one who the book of Revelations calls the one who lives forever, the Creator's eternal perspective is beyond human lifespan or comprehension. Yet, in his manifold mercy, he gave mankind a human scale, weekly cycle to mirror his eternal holy rhythm. This is mercy, order, and divine structure. And it was spoken by his voice, not observed in the sky. So time is subject to the Most High, not the moon. This is the book of Psalms chapter 90 verse 4. "For 1,000 years in thy sight are but as yesterday when it is past, and as a watch in the night." So the Most High commands the time. He does not submit to it, whether it's 24 hours or as 1,000 years pertaining to a day in creation. His word controls the flow. So when he says the seventh day is holy, that decree isn't ruled by a cycle or stars. It's absolute. So now it's time to test the doctrine by fire. This is the book of Genesis chapter 1 verse 3 through 5. "And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the day light, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. So on day 1 there was light. On day 2 there was a separation of the waters, but still no moon. It means the structure of the week was already existing. Time exists, which means time has dominion over the moon. This is the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 6 through 8. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. And the evening and the morning were the second day. The moon still didn't exist until day 4. Whether it's a 24-hour cycle or a 1,000-year interval, the moon dictated, defined, and authorized nothing." This is the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 14 through 16, and it reads, "And God said, Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth, and it was so. And God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser night to rule the night. He made the stars also." So let's be clear. If the Most High sanctified the 7th day, then the weekly cycle started on day 1. But the moon itself wasn't created until day 4, which means day 1, 2, and 3 all passed without a moon to guide anything. This destroys the Lunar Sabbath doctrine, because the weekly count began before the moon existed. So the moon itself has never been the foundation of the Sabbath cycle, whether it was 72 hours or over the course of 3,000 years within that interval. Time itself has dominion over the moon. If the week existed before the moon, then the moon doesn't define the time. Time defines the moon's place within the order. And time itself submits to Yahawah, our power. This is the book of Psalm, chapter 104, verse 19, and it reads, "He appointed the moon for seasons. The sun knoweth his going down." The moon was appointed. It wasn't the appointer. It was placed into an existing structure. It doesn't create time. It functions within it. The Sabbath was already declared. Time was already moving. The moon was simply added into that flow. The Most High has dominion over both time and the moon. This is the book of Baruch, chapter 3, verses 33 through 35, and it reads, "He that sendeth forth light, and it goeth, calleth it again, and it obeyeth him with fear. The stars shined in their watches and rejoiced. When he calleth them, they say, Here we be. And so with cheerfulness they showed light unto him that made them. This is our God, and there shall none other be accounted of in comparison of him." This is the book of Joshua, chapter 10, verses 12 and 13, and it reads, "Then spake Joshua to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand thou upon Gibeon, and thou moon in the valley of Ajalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stayed, until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies. Is not this written in the book of Jasher? So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven, and hasted not to go down about a whole day. And there was no day like that before it or after it, that the Lord hearkened unto the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. Time obeys the Most High. The moon obeys the Most High. The sun stands still when he commands. So what authority does the moon have to restructure the command he already gave? None. The Most High uses the moon. He does not answer to it. The 6-in-1 pattern is the perpetual cycle. This 6-in-1 pattern, 6 days of work, 1 day of rest, was not just set at creation. It was perpetual, independent, and unchanging. This pattern was established before Moses, confirmed before Sinai, maintained through the wilderness, never reset by a moon. This is the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, verse 14, and it reads, I know that whatsoever God doeth, it shall be forever. Nothing can be put to it, nor anything taken from it. And God doeth, that man should fear before him. And what did he do? He sanctified the 7th day, not the 8th day, not the 10th after the new moon, the 7th day over and over. This is the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 4, verse 19, and it reads, Unless thou lift up thine eyes unto heaven, and when thou seest the sun, and the moon, and the stars, even all the host of heaven, shouldest be driven to worship them and serve them, which the Lord thy God hath divided unto all the nations under the whole heaven. The Israelites were warned not to look to the heavens for timing or guidance that contradicted the spoken word. But what does the Lunar Sabbath advocates do? They reset the Most High's pattern according to the moon cycle, which violates the very foundation of how the Sabbath was given. The Lunar Sabbath fails before it even starts. By day 2, it's exposed. It kamikazes. It tries to place the moon at the center of timekeeping, yet the moon was not even present when the cycle of days began. This isn't just bad doctrine, it's impossible mathematically. The Sabbath came from the mouth of the Most High, not the moon. Time submits to him, not the other way around. The 6-in-1 pattern is eternal and unchanging. The moon has zero jurisdiction over the Sabbath cycle. Any doctrine that tells you otherwise, by default, is false. So, in this first section, I've covered creation order, Torah commands, divine authority, time dominion, and basic logic. You have to deal with that. Moving on, this is where we begin to peel away at the fragility of this doctrine, piece by piece. This is the book of Exodus, chapter 16, verse 1, and it reads, And they took their journey from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came into the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the 2nd month, after their departing out of the land of Egypt. Let's pause right here. They've been out of Egypt 1 full month. They are not at Mount Sinai yet. That happens in Exodus 19. And yet, the Most High tests them with the Sabbath. This is the book of Exodus, chapter 16, verse 4 and 5, and it reads, Then said the Lord unto Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain rate every day, that I may prove them, whether they will walk in my law or no. And it shall come to pass that on the 6th day they shall prepare that which they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily. Before a covenant was written in stone tablets, before a priesthood was established, before the ark, before the tabernacle, the 6-in-1 Sabbath cycle was already in effect. That is a dagger to the Lunar Sabbath doctrine. This is the book of Exodus chapter 16 verses 23 through 30. And he said unto them, This is that which the Lord hath said. Tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath unto the Lord. Bake that which you will bake today, and seed that what you will seed. And that which remaineth over lay up for you to be kept until the morning. And they laid it up till the morning as Moses bade. And it did not stink, neither was there any worm therein. And Moses says, Eat that today, for today is the Sabbath unto the Lord. Today ye shall not find it in the field. 6 days ye shall gather it, but on the 7th, which is the Sabbath, in it there shall be none. And it came to pass that there went out some of the people on the 7th day for to gather, and they found none. And the Lord said unto Moses, How long refuse ye to keep my commandments and my laws? See, for that the Lord hath given you the Sabbath, therefore he giveth you on the 6th day the bread of 2 days. Abide ye every man in his place, let no man go out of his place on the 7th day. So the people rested on the 7th day. So in Exodus 28, what does the scripture say? How long refuse ye to keep my commandments and my laws? But wait, what laws? We ain't even at Mount Sinai. This is before the 10 commandments are formally spoken, which means the law of the Sabbath predated Sinai. And if it predated Sinai, it wasn't new. It was restored, not introduced. Restored from when holy men before them kept it. See, Abraham knew the Sabbath as well. This wasn't just a new order from Moses' generation. It was already established in the walk of the patriarchs. This is the book of Genesis chapter 26 verse 5, and it reads, Because that Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Abraham, long before Israel, long before Egypt, long before Sinai, was already keeping the commandments of Yahawah. Which commandments? The Sabbath is chief among them. There is no way Abraham was righteous and walking with Yah while breaking the 4th commandment. That right there destroys any notion that the Sabbath came into existence at Sinai. The laws were alive in the walk of the fathers. Sinai was the codifying, not the origin. So now that the lunar model is getting cut, it's starting to bleed, because this destroys the lunar Sabbath. The Israelites are in the wilderness of sin, still a month away from Sinai. No new moon reset in sight. No waiting for a crescent. No waiting for a dark moon. No signs in the heaven to direct a change in the pattern. But they kept the Sabbath on a 6-in-1 weekly cycle without a single word about the moon. This is the book of Deuteronomy chapter 5 verse 3, and it reads, The Lord made not this covenant with our fathers, but with us, even us who are all of us here alive this day. Meaning Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were never given written tablets, but they knew the Sabbath. And now the Father brings it back to a people being reborn, testing them in the wilderness like children. And he doesn't guide them by the stars. He commands them by the pattern that was already set. Between Exodus 16 and Exodus 19, a new moon would have had to have occurred. That's just simple math. But nothing in the text indicates that they waited to restart the count, pause the cycle, or adjusted for the lunar phase. The Sabbath continued, unbroken. This is Yahawah's order, not astrology. The Most High did not hang his commandments on phases of the sky. He hung them on obedience to his word. This is the book of Exodus, chapter 19, verse 1, and it reads, "In the 3rd month, when the children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt, the same day came they into the wilderness of Sinai. Now they've arrived at the foot of the mountain, a whole month later, still keeping weekly Sabbaths. But the commandments aren't spoken until Exodus 20, and they don't receive the tablets until Exodus 31 and 32. That's weeks of activity, but they're still keeping the weekly Sabbaths in that time. And within that time, they are told to sanctify themselves. They witness thunder, lightning, smoke. Moses goes up and down the mountain multiple times. The entire tabernacle is constructed. All of this, they're still obeying the same 6-in-1 Sabbath pattern." This is the book of Exodus, chapter 31, verse 16 and 17, and it reads, "Wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations for a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the 7th day he rested and was refreshed." So, there it is, set in stone, a perpetual covenant. No mention of a moon, no mention of resets, no mentioning of looking in the sky. So here in Sinai, they continue to keep the Sabbath as it was written from aforetime, as it was spoken. But at Sinai, at the foot of the mountain, how did they receive the Lord's commandments? How was it given to them verbally? What did it say? This is the book of Exodus, chapter 20, verse 8, and it reads, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shall thy labor and do all thy work, but the Sabbath is the day of the Lord. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that's in them, and rested on the 7th day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it." So, several points to bring into account with these commandments. The first word is what's staggering. He says to remember. What are they remembering? Did he say remember the moon phase to keep it holy? No, because the moon had nothing to do with the existence of the Sabbath. So what are they remembering? They're remembering the consecutive and consistent 6-in-1 pattern that was created from the beginning. The same pattern that the holy men before them kept. And he doubled down in verse 11 where he clarified, "For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and then rested." Said nothing about the moon. That's what they're remembering. The way they've been keeping the commandments as it pertains to the Sabbath up until the point where they entered into Sinai. They had been doing it for weeks already. And that pattern was based on the establishment of the Lord raining manna down and them gathering it on that pattern. This is the book of Exodus, chapter 16, verse 35, and it reads, "And the children of Israel did eat manna for 40 years. For 40 years they ate manna until they came into the land inhabited. They did eat manna until they came into the borders of the land of Canaan. So for 40 years they were sustained by a Sabbath cycle that never was reset by a moon. The manna stopped when they entered the land, not when the moon changed. No matter how long they stayed at Sinai, no matter how many new moons passed, no matter how many sacrifices, laws, or chapters unfolded, the 6-in-1 Sabbath cycle never stopped. The Torah says what it says, and the moon is nowhere found of that cycle. The Most High, Barakatah Yahawah, the Most High gave the Sabbath before the establishment of a priesthood, before the Tabernacle, and before the cornerstone of the Lunar Sabbath doctrine, which is in Leviticus 23. This is the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 12, verse 32, and it reads, "What things soever I command you, observe to do it, that thou shalt not add thereto, nor diminish from it." That's the nail. The Sabbath was commanded exactly as Yahawah gave it. No lunar adjustments, no extra days, no modifications allowed. So let's be absolutely clear. Leviticus 23, which is the chapter the lunar Sabbath proponents cling to, is not introduced until much later. It was given to them after the Exodus, after the wilderness journey, after the manna test and Sabbath obedience, after the giving of the 10 Commandments, and even until after the construction of the tabernacle. There were no priests yet officiating in full office. The structure of the Levitical priesthood hadn't been executed. This means the weekly Sabbath law already stood fully functional without Leviticus 23 even being spoken. It was Torah law. That completely destroys the idea that Leviticus 23 introduces or modifies the Sabbath cycle. It doesn't establish the Sabbath. It merely lists it because it was already in effect. So Leviticus chapters 1 through 22, those chapters deal with offerings, priestly garments, laws of purity, sacrifices, and atonements, all preparatory work before the Mawa'adim, the appointed times, are officially listed. Then you get to Leviticus 23, and it reads, "And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them concerning the feast of the Lord, which ye shall proclaim to be holy convocations. These are my feasts, the Mawa'adim in the ancient Hebrew." But what's listed first? The weekly Sabbath. Not the new moon, not the Passover, not trumpets, which proves the Sabbath existed, was honored, and was enforced long before Leviticus 23 even gets a word out. This chapter cannot be foundational of the Shabbat. It only recognizes what Yahawah already established in Genesis and reaffirmed in Exodus. The moon is just a sign that tracks, not defines or authorizes. The Torah order came first, not the priestly rituals, festival calendars, and not new moons. That shuts the door on any claim that the lunar Sabbath began with the feast cycle. It didn't. The Most High gave the Sabbath before the priesthood, before the tabernacle, and before Leviticus 23. Now this is a dagger. This is the book of Exodus, chapter 40, verse 17, and it reads, "And it came to pass in the first month, in the second year, on the first day of the month, that the tabernacle was reared up." So let this settle in, my Akim, my faithful Akim, trying to do all things in spirit and in truth. This is for you. Yahawah our powered, Barakatah Yahawah, commanded the rearing of the tabernacle on the first day of the month. Now, according to the Lunar Sabbath doctrine, that would make it a Sabbath. But here's the knockout. That's the new moon date. Work was done, holy work, divine work, and the Father was pleased. So how can a Sabbath be a new moon under the lunar view? How can it be? How can the Sabbath if the new moon is the Sabbath under the lunar doctrine, how can work be done on that day? It's a Sabbath. How do you justify the most sacred structure in the Israelite history being built on what you claim is a holy convocation day of rest? You can't, because the weekly Sabbath did not bow to the moon. The 6-in-1 consistent pattern never stopped. Not for a new month, not for a new moon, not for anything. If the first day of the month was truly a Sabbath, then Yahawah himself would have violated his own law by commanding work. That's not just a crack in the lunar doctrine. It's beginning to crumble away in weather. So let's keep it $1.55, my people. By the time the tabernacle was reared up, a solid 9 months went by from when they entered into Sinai. Over 9 months is the count from the travel from the wilderness of sin into Sinai, and a consistent, uninterrupted 6-in-1 weekly pattern continued up until the point where they reared the tabernacle. If the 6-in-1 work rest week happened for a minimum of 9 months straight, it reaffirms what the Holy Sabbath is, that it's observed, no questions asked. And that 6-in-1 work rest cycle is still defined as a full week within a Hebrew month. No add-ons, no lingering non-existing days, no floaters, and no 8-day weeks. In 9 months straight, they kept the Sabbath consistently. They never stopped and reset it a week, reset it a month, nor did they observe a new moon. No ifs, ands, or buts. They got the pattern down packed. How many new moons were ignored during this time? How many weren't Sabbaths? Ezra, a priest sent to restore order. Ezra wasn't just a scribe, he was a priest of the lineage of Aaron, sent back after captivity to restore the execution of the law in Jerusalem. He was deeply trained in Torah, authorized by the Persian king himself, and committed to reestablishing everything according to Moses. Now, mind you, this is out when they just got out of exile unto the Babylonians, right? And Ezra, one of the greatest prophets in the whole Bible, was sent to reestablish everything according to the law of Moses. This is the book of Ezra, chapter 7, verse 10, and it reads, "For Ezra had prepared his heart to seek the law of the Lord, and to do it, and to teach it in Israel, statutes and judgments." Now watch this. This is the book of Ezra, chapter 7, verse 9, and it reads, "For upon the first day of the month began he to go up from Babylon, and on the first day of the 5th month he came to Jerusalem, according to the good hand of God upon him." Twice, the new moon, the first day of the month, is shown to be a day of work, not a day of rest. Ezra, a man rebuilding the nation through the law of Moses, is traveling, counseling, purging sin, and executing judgment on the new moon. If the new moon were commanded to be a Sabbath, Ezra, a righteous law-keeping priest, would be in violation of Torah law, but the Most High never rebukes him. Why? Because the new moon was never a Sabbath outside of trumpets. So if you have to rewire time, reset weeks, or skip commandments just to defend your doctrine, then your doctrine is already dead. Ezra didn't honor a lunar Sabbath. Moses didn't teach one. Christ didn't follow one. And the prophets didn't defend one. And I've shown examples from the time of Genesis to the time of the forefathers, to the time in the wilderness of sin, to the time leading up to the building of the tabernacle, to a time right outside of exile, that the new moon was not observed as a Sabbath day. The 7-day cycle from creation to the wilderness to the Messiah's time and into prophecy never breaks, never shifts, never floats. So the weekly Sabbath is first, always. Leviticus 23 is often hijacked by Lunar Sabbath advocates, but let's deal with truth. Verse 3 opens the chapter with this. This is the book of Leviticus, chapter 23, verse 3, and it reads, 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of rest, and the holy convocation. Ye shall do no work therein, but it is the Sabbath of the Lord in all your dwellings. Before any mention of any feast, high Sabbaths, the new moons, or the Mawa'adim, the appointed times, the weekly Sabbath stands alone. This is a permanent command, not dependent upon the moon, not seasonal, not flexible. It is the first Mawa'ad, appointed time, which everything else must submit to. Before the moon marked out the feast days, the Word of God marked out the Sabbath. And the reason why it is listed is because it's been a continuance since the moment the Lord showed them how to do it in the wilderness of sin. So at the time it's listed in Leviticus 23, it's already set in stone. It's not being put there because now the Lord is going to reset it or to modify it because he gave the Sabbath in the first week of creation, whether that was a 24-hour interval or a 1,000-year interval. The moon had no dominion over it. So, fixed feast days do not reign over the weekly Sabbath. Date-based feast like Passover, Day of Atonement, unleavened bread are all locked into the calendar. But the Sabbath, it does not answer to dates. It answers to the cycle of 7. It reigns from Genesis to Revelations. You can have a Passover on Monday or a Thursday. It didn't matter. The week rolls on. The Sabbath comes after 7th day without interruption. Comes every 7th day without interruption. The lunar doctrine tries to fuse the date-based feast with the 6-in-1 Sabbath, but Torah clearly separates them. This is the book of Leviticus, chapter 19, verse 30, and it reads, Ye shall keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord. 2 categories. Sabbaths equal fixed cycle. The sanctuary equals the Mawa'adim, the appointed feast. One is timeless, one is scheduled, but the lunar doctrine fuses them and gets crushed under the weight of Torah. Now, Firstfruits destroys the lunar calendar to the death blow. This is the book of Leviticus, chapter 23, verse 11, and it reads, And he shall wave the sheaf offering before the Lord to be accepted for you on the morrow After the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it. This is first fruits. First fruits has no calendar date. It's wholly dependent on the Sabbath. Now, one may ask, which Sabbath? The one they've been walking in. You can't keep first fruits without acknowledging the Sabbath that they've been keeping the whole time. This is precisely why the reminder is given in the 3rd verse, because they were already keeping the Sabbath for a year. Lunar doctrine collapses here because it has no 7-day week in their system. Their Sabbath floats. There's no consistency for the morrow after, because some weeks have 8 days, maybe even more. Some days float. I've heard theories where they say a day or two may not even count. This is inconsistent in Torah. This is the book of Joshua, chapter 5, verse 10 through 12, and it reads, "And the children of Israel encamped at Gilgal, and kept Passover on the 14th day of the month, at even in the plains of Jericho. And they did eat of the old corn of the land on the morrow after Passover, unleavened cakes and parched corn in the self same day. And the manna ceased on the morrow after they had eaten of the old corn of the land. Neither had the children of Israel manna any more. But they did eat of the fruit of the land of Canaan that year." That's why in Joshua chapter 5, 10 through 12, when they enter the land, it aligns perfectly. Passover on the 14th, unleavened bread on the 15th, first fruits on the morrow after the Sabbath. And the manna stopped that very day. No lunar reset, no new moon count, no floating Sabbath. No days that don't count, just a pure pattern set by Yahawah's own calendar, baked into creation, honored by obedience, and confirmed by heaven when the manna stopped. Now, moving forward, let's go to the New Testament. Yahawah's death and resurrection seal the pattern. This is the book of Matthew, chapter 28, verses 1 through 3, and it reads, "In the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see the sepulchre. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for the angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone from the door and sat upon it. His countenance was like lightning, and his raiment white as snow." So as you can see, that's not a lunar gibberish. That's a 7-day week still active in Yahawah's day. It clearly states, "In the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week." That's 7 days, uninterrupted. The resurrection was on the first day of the week. That proves a 7-day cycle was active during Yahawah's time, and it aligns with first fruits, the day after the Sabbath, just like Torah instructed. If the moon controlled the Sabbath, then first fruits would never consistently land after a true Sabbath. But in Yahawah's death, burial, and resurrection, the Torah template is upheld. He was crucified before the Sabbath, rested in the grave on the Sabbath, rose after the Sabbath on the morrow. That's Torah. That's order. It's undeniable. This is the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 20 through 23. "But now Christ is risen from the dead and become the first fruits of them that slept. For since by man came death, by man came also the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all die, even so in Christ shall all be made alive. But every man in his own order, Christ the first fruits, afterward they that are Christ at his coming." So Paul ain't making up a new doctrine. He's quoting Torah. Yahawah's resurrection didn't just happen to land on the day after the Sabbath. It was destined. It was written. It was the fulfillment of Leviticus 23:11 on the morrow after the Sabbath. How does that work with floating lunar weeks? It doesn't. See, when you examine the Lunar Sabbath doctrine, you're left to wonder, what is a week? You don't have consistent weeks of 6 and 1 work schedule, which would interrupt the perpetual sign. What counts as a week under this doctrine? We know what counts as a week according to the unchanging word of the Lord the highest. This is the book of Genesis, chapter 7, verse 4, and it reads, "For yet 7 days, and I will cause it to rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living substance that I have made will I destroy from off the face of the earth." So there it is, plain upon tables. It tells you what the week is, and it tells you for 40 days and 40 nights, I will destroy everything. It doesn't say, but wait, there's going to be a floating week. It doesn't say, wait, one of these days ain't going to count. One of these days won't count for the 40 days that I'm declaring this. It's plain. The Most High's word is not something that's left to interpretation when it's given in clear commandments. This is the book of Sirach, chapter 39, verse 24, and it reads, "As his ways are plain unto the holy, so are they stumbling blocks unto the wicked. The Lord's commandments are plain." If the weekly Sabbath was reset every new moon, there would be no way to time Firstfruits or Pentecost with accuracy unless you change the tenets of Pentecost. Scripture does it perfectly every time, because the Sabbath that pertains to those particular assignments in tracking Firstfruits is reminding them that the Sabbath they've been keeping prior to getting this assignment follow that pattern, that Sabbath. You don't have to assign a Sabbath to one of the feast days to keep up with something that precedes the feast days, because the Sabbath is not governed by the moon. It's governed by the word of the eternal King. How many times must Torah bow to a breakdown? How long must you alter the scripture to fit a moon? Even after Mount Sinai, even after Leviticus 23 was given, the 6 and 1 cycle stood unshaken. In fact, in Numbers 15, while the Israelites were still on the wilderness route to Canaan, a man was put to death for gathering sticks on the Sabbath. This is the book of Numbers, chapter 15, verse 32, and it reads, "And while the children of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man that gathered sticks upon the Sabbath day." So let that sink in. This is post Leviticus 23. This is post Sinai. They're en route to the promised land, and there still is no mention of the moon, no mention of a new count, no mention of a calendar rest. He violated Sabbath that had nothing to do with moon phases, just the eternal, untouchable 6 and 1 rhythm of the Most High God. The Torah is silent as it pertains to floating days, new moon transitions, or reset weeks. You would literally be adding to the scriptures. Deuteronomy 4 and 2, my brothers. And yet Yahawah judged that man by clear, consistent standard. That means even the punishment for the Sabbath breaking followed the same rule given with the manna, proven once again. This is Yahawah's order. No shifts, no floaters, no lunar override. Now, a week is 7 days, consistent. Torah says so. This is the book of Exodus, chapter 20, verse 9 through 11, and it reads, 6 days thou shalt labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested on the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. This is the foundation. This is the foundational week structure. 6 days of labor, 1 day of rest equals a week. Yahawah established it himself. This is the book of Genesis, chapter 29, verse 27, and it reads, fulfill her week, and we will give thee this also for the service which thou shalt serve me yet another 7 years. So Jacob had to fulfill 7 days pertaining to the wedding celebration of Leah, and Torah calls that a week. Then he served another 7 years while having Rachel. This confirms the biblical definition. A week is 7 days, no floating days, no reset. So the lunar model has no real week. A new moon is not counted as part of the week in some models. The new moon is a Sabbath in some models. The new moon is not a Sabbath, and every day counts. But in their model, weeks float and resets monthly. Months are 29 days 1 month, 30 the next, some say 29 and a half. This is confusion, meaning every month must interpret or distort the 7-day rhythm. They add translation days, days that don't belong to any week. Again, this destroys consistency. This is confusion. The Lord the Highest is not the author of it. Yahawah established in Exodus 16 with manna, a 6+1 pattern for 40 straight years. If any day was skipped, the manna cycle breaks and the Sabbath is lost. But Pentecost is the nail in the coffin. This is the book of Leviticus, chapter 23, verses 15 and 16, and it reads, and ye shall count unto you from the morrow after the Sabbath, from the day that ye brought the sheaf of the wave offering, 7 Sabbaths shall be complete. Even unto the morrow after the 7th Sabbath, ye shall number 50 days, and ye shall offer a new meat offering unto the Lord. Pentecost equals 7 completed weeks. 49 days plus 1 is 50 days, the literal meaning of Pentecost. This counting system only works if every week is 7 days. You cannot have more than 50 days and call it Pentecost. You cannot have 53 days, 54 days, 100 days. It does not matter. It makes Torah change. So under the lunar doctrine, weeks shift depending on the moon. Days are skipped or uncounted. It's impossible to reach 7 Sabbaths complete. Their count either lands short or overshoots because their weeks don't exist. Pentecost is 50 days, not 100. Even other translations show you that. This is the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 16, verses 9 and 10, and it reads, 7 weeks shall thy number unto thee. Begin to number 7 weeks from the time such as thou beginnest to put the sickle to the corn. And And thou shalt keep the feast of weeks unto the Lord thy God with the tribute of a free will offering of thine hand, which thou shalt give unto the Lord thy God, according as the Lord thy God has blessed thee. 7 weeks shalt thou number, not 100, not 99, a fixed count of 7 weeks. 7 times 7 is 49 days, and the 50th is Pentecost. From such a time as thou beginnest to put the sickle to the corn. That's first fruits, which is tied directly to the morrow after the Sabbath, not to a lunar date. And if that doesn't put the nail in the coffin, this will. For anybody trying to insinuate that certain days just don't count, the offerings prove that every day counts. There's no such thing as a floating day or a day that doesn't count. So when you read the book of Numbers, chapter 28, 1 through 10, your daily burnt offerings, morning and afternoon every day. How is this possible if a day doesn't count? We're reading the feast of the Lord in Leviticus 23 pertaining to the feast. Sacrifices are on the feast days, but somehow one of the days out of the month don't count. How is that so? How is that so when the Lord requireth his offerings in this time? Sabbath offerings, additional on the 7th day. When the Sabbath comes around, he doesn't say, don't give me the offerings that are offered daily. He say, I got to have that too. Break that off. Feast day offerings, add that on top. It's never in place of, it's never a substitute of. Every single day matters. You can't float, pause, or translate days when Yahawah demands blood every morning and every evening. No gaps, no grace days, no missing offerings. In the book of Numbers, chapter 28 and 29, in the 7th month, hundreds of animals are offered. Every feast stacked, not replaced, no substitutes. I need my daily offerings. I need my offerings for the feast. I need my Sabbath offerings. I need all mine. I got to have it. There's no concept of pausing the calendar or ignoring certain days. That is a dagger, an absolute sledgehammer. If White Walkers are still trying to keep the Lunar Sabbath after this breakdown, these precepts become the Valyrian steel that shatters them to pieces. That's why weeks must be real, fixed, and unbroken. So the lunar model can't hold Pentecost. It can't define a week. It denies offerings. It breaks Yahawah's system. The Torah, every day, it counts. It counts every week. It counts every offering. It counts every single tenant. The lunar model, it loses track. It can't count weeks. It can't land on Pentecost without altering the divine words of Yahawah. It can't match first fruits. It can't stand before the order of Yahawah. A doctrine that can't count doesn't belong in the covenant. When it says on the morrow after the Sabbath, it doesn't say on the morrow after the feast, which is a holy convocation and likened as a Sabbath day. No, it's talking about the Sabbath that they've been walking in orderly for a year. Why would it all of a sudden change and say, oh, by the way, I'm going to slide this new moon and you can track it like that? No, that interrupts the 6 and 1 count. Now, the proponents of the Lunar Sabbath doctrine use Ezekiel 46 to add to their claim. But Ezekiel 46:1 makes the distinction undeniable, and it reads, "Thus saith the Lord God, the gate of the inner court that looketh toward the east shall be shut 6 working days, but on the Sabbath it shall be open, and in the day of the new moon it shall be open." This is not a merger, it's separation. The Sabbath is one category, the new moon is another. The gate opens on both, but it doesn't mean both are Sabbaths. Both are honored, but only one carries the law of rest. If they were the same, the verse would never split them, but Yahawah separates them on purpose. Ezekiel 46:1 draws a divine distinction. The gate of the inner court shall be shut 6 working days, but on the Sabbath it shall be open, and the day of the new moon it shall be open. This verse doesn't equate to the new moon with the Sabbath, it separates them. Why? Because all major feasts are Sabbaths, but the new moon is not called a Sabbath, nor is it a working day, so it can't qualify with the 6 days preceding the Sabbath, nor can it qualify as a Sabbath itself. It's its own day, but it's set apart and it has observance with weight, but not classified like the other two. The lunar doctrine collapses here because their entire model is built on equating the new moon as a Sabbath. Yet Ezekiel doesn't make that claim. In fact, Yahawah's word purposely distinguishes between them. The new moon, not a Sabbath, also not a working day. But it doesn't forbid working, but it's not a working day. It is a day of observance. It's its own category. This is the book of Isaiah, chapter 66, verse 23. And it reads, "And it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me, saith the Lord." Again, 2 distinct time markers. One governs months, the other governs weeks. Each plays its role. But the Sabbath remains the only command for rest on the 7th day. When you read 1 Samuel chapter 20, verse 5, 18, and 24, it reveals David's conduct during the new moon. He skips the king's table, and Jonathan anticipates his absence. There was a reverence, a custom, perhaps even a holy meal, but not a Sabbath commandment. If the new moon were a Sabbath, why would such a meal take place on a day of rest? Why is there a meal with Saul in the first place? 1 Maccabees chapter 10 verse 34 even shows us that even under Gentile rule, the new moon remained culturally sacred, and it reads, "Furthermore, I will that all the feasts and Sabbaths and new moons and solemn days and the 3 days before the feast and the 3 days after the feast shall be of immunity and freedom for all the Jews in my realm." So notice the order: feast, new moons, Sabbaths, again showing distinction, not collapse. Even under the rule of King Alexander, he is telling these Jews that he will give them these days within his reign. The new moon was not a Sabbath by law, but it was protected as part of the national identity. Has nothing to do with the new moon being a Sabbath. We've already proven that the new moon wasn't a Sabbath in the time of the Most High, in the time in the wilderness of sin, in the time leading up to the rearing of the tabernacle. We've even shown after the time of the tabernacle, even after exile in the time of Ezra, it wasn't a Sabbath. The only time there is a Sabbath on the new moon is trumpets. This is the book of Amos, chapter 8, verses 4 and 5. And it calls out the wicked. Hear this, O ye that swallow up the needy, even to make the poor of the land to fail, saying, when will the new moon be gone, that we may sell corn, and the Sabbath, that we may set forth the wheat, making the ephah small, and the shekel great, and the falsifying the balances by deceit? These weren't righteous businessmen frustrated by the Levitical law. These were greedy merchants, angry that the people were putting reverence over revenue. But dig deeper, they were mad that even the poor among Israel chose to honor the Most High rather than consume. They didn't just stop selling, the poor stopped buying. The righteous refused to treat holy days like every other day, and that decision exposed the wicked. So even though they could consume on the new moon, they wouldn't, because they were referencing it with the same reference as the other high days. Nowhere in the scripture commands rest on the new moon. Nowhere does it call the new moon a Sabbath except trumpets. It was respected, it was observed, and it was culturally weighted. But it wasn't legislated like a Sabbath. To twist the new moon into a Sabbath is to add to the word, and that comes with consequences. Deuteronomy 4 and 2. So, in this lesson, we've established that the Sabbath was established before the moon existed. We've established that the 7-day week was fixed from the beginning, no matter if it was a 24-hour cycle or a 1,000-year cycle, and it never rests. The manna cycle in the wilderness confirmed a continuous weekly Sabbath for 40 years without a single word of it being interrupted. We prove in Leviticus 23 that the weekly Sabbath is separate from the feast days because they had been walking in it for a year straight. We prove the weekly Sabbath governs time and is not governed by dates or moon phases. Firstfruits must follow the weekly Sabbath. It's not tied to a lunar date. Even Yahawah's death, burial, and resurrection followed the weekly Sabbath pattern, not a moon. We've proved counting to Pentecost, it equals 50, demands a consistent, unbroken 7-day weeks. The Torah itself lists a week as 7 days, nothing floating, nothing where you could take away a day, because offerings were still given daily and weekly without floating days. We prove Ezekiel 46 and 1 separates the new moon from the Sabbath, as they are not the same. We've also proved that all distinguished reverence for the new moon and never equated with the Sabbath when you look in the books of the prophets. Nowhere in Torah is rest commanded on the new moon. New moon is reverenced as cultural, not legislative like the Sabbath. The Tabernacle, the commandments, and the wilderness judgments all reflect a fixed moon. The true Sabbath is tested by fire, not floating calendars. So all that has to be dealt with. So, in conclusion, I don't speak because I'm greater than my teachers. I'm not above those who labored before me, and the spirit that was put on them was put on me to open my eyes and see, and I am forever indebted. I'm not wiser than the elders who planted the seeds in the dry soil, while I was still learning to walk. But one of the most critical lessons I have learned in this walk from the elders is this: every teaching must be filtered through the divine words of Yahawah. Not emotion, not tradition, not what seems right, but the word. Line upon line, precept upon precept, and tried by fire. And when you do that, doctrines fail, lies break, even beloved teachings, if they don't hold up, they must be let go. Because Yahawah's order isn't built on men's calendars or feelings. It's built on his word. And that word is pure, eternal, unbreakable. This is the book of Psalms, chapter 12, verse 6, and it reads, "The words of the Lord are pure words, as silver tried in a furnace of earth, purified 7 times. This is the book of 1 Thessalonians, chapter 5, verse 21. "Prove all things, hold fast that which is good." So let this be clear. This lesson of the Lunar Sabbath doctrine wasn't about pride, and it wasn't about being right. It was about restoring reverence back to the commandment of the Most High and what he sanctified by his own mouth, the 7th day Shabbat. No floaters, no resets, no moon. Just his voice, just his pattern, just his word. The moon is the sign and it tracks. It does not define, neither does it authorize. And if that offends, so be it. But as for me, I'll continue to try every doctrine by the fire of the Most High. Because only what he ordained will stand. I want to give all honor, praises, and glory unto the Father. I hope you are all edified, and shalom.